Welcome, dungeon crawlers. Today on Raptor'sRecon, we have a special treat for you. It's our channel's first installment of a new segment we've dubbed Now for Something Completely Different, where we broaden the topics that this channel covers. Today we will be introducing you all to a D&D 5th edition Kickstarter RPG from Privateer Press that can be purchased at steamforgedgames.com. Now, I'll preface this by stating this is not a paid sponsorship for the product, though we're not adverse to doing that kind of thing on this channel. It's more of something some friends of mine and I found to be fun and thought would be nice to introduce to the broader audience. We're adding bookmarks to the video as well. That way it's easy for you to go back and reference something you might have missed. Also, before we start, we want to thank all of you subscribers for your support to the channel. And to all of you newcomers, if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider smashing that like button, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell so that way you don't miss any of this channel's content. Now with all of that said, on with the video. What happens when high fantasy meets industrial age technology? When magic isn't just arcane spells, but also fuels powerful war machines? I would like to introduce you to the Iron Kingdoms, a tabletop RPG that fuses classic fantasy elements with gritty steampunk aesthetics, where sorcerers wield spell-powered firearms, mechanized warjacks stomp across the battlefield, and dragons are terrifying godlike entities with their own cult-like followings. If you're a fan of Warhammer 40k, Eberron, or even Baldur's Gate 3, then Iron Kingdoms offers a world that feels both familiar and wildly unique. Originally introduced as a setting for Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and later evolving into its own wargaming system, this RPG has now made its way into D&D 5th edition, bringing with it a wealth of new classes, races, and mechanics that redefine how players experience the tabletop genre. Now, who adapted this uniquely fun setting for 5th edition? Chief Creative Director Matthew D. Wilson, along with his team, brought their vision to this setting, and Art Director Mike Vaillancourt led a group of talented artists to fill their books with amazing artwork that brings their vision to life. Today we're diving into this incredible setting, breaking down what makes the Iron Kingdom so unique, from its playable races and classes to its deadly dragons. Afterwards, we will jump right into creating one of its most iconic classes, the Warcaster. These armored, magic-wielding warriors control massive steam-powered constructs called warjacks, making them some of the most powerful and versatile characters in the game. Let's begin. The brief introduction from the core reads as follows. The lands known as the Iron Kingdoms have been shaped by strong faiths, the acts of the gods themselves, and centuries of conflict. They are home to proud peoples whose identities and cultures are inextricably linked with the ground upon which they build their homes and cities. And although they have survived plague, famine, war, invasion, and the horrors of the claiming, the citizens of these kingdoms and the people of the wilds that surround them know that their greatest challenges may yet lie ahead. The book goes into the cosmology of the Iron Kingdoms and some of its most defining events. One such event is the Orgoth invasion and the eventual rebellion against them. These ancient humans wielded dark magics and necromancy, subjugating many of the peoples for hundreds of years. They even define their own timeline as BR, like before the rebellion against them, and AR, after rebellion against these almost unstoppable forces. Their invasion would not have been thwarted until a god Thamor brokered a deal to bring the gift of magic to the rest of humankind. This deal with infernal creatures from the outer abyss would allow them to have a chance to fight against the invading Orgoth nation who championed those dark magics. But as with all Faustian deals, there comes a time for the bill to be paid. The Infernals would invade the Iron Kingdoms in what is known as the Claiming. These beings came to take 2/3 of the souls of all the peoples, and were it not for the uniting of all nations, they would have succeeded. Players find themselves 5 years past the claiming, where civilizations are rebuilding, conflict continues, and infernal agents are being hunted down. So this makes for an exciting setting filled with a lot of possibilities. I encourage you all to visit Steamforged Games and pick up a copy of these books. There are a number of products out there. They've got the core book, The Deep Wild, Borderlands and Beyond, and The Nightmare Empire, just to name a few. I highly encourage you once again just to go to Steamforged Games and pick up a copy, take a look at what they have as far as their products. The PDFs are bookmarked and well made and really easy to read. Take a look at some of the artwork here. And if you're interested, see the link I post below. That's my unofficial endorsement of the product, but go see for yourself. You won't regret it. It's unique. It's something different, and it's a lot of fun. Now let's get into this kind of stuff here. Now that you kind of have an idea what the Iron Kingdom is all about. This next section of this video, we're going to cover some of those basic mechanics, the core mechanics, and an example later on of character creation. So stick around and you won't want to miss this. The Iron Kingdoms introduces several new and unique races beyond the classic D&D lineup. Now some of them obviously are based on the classics, but they have a little bit of a twist that makes them unique to this setting. So first off, you've got the RPG standard humans, but the cool thing about it here is that each human nation is different. They have their unique history. They also have their own unique traits. So there's certain, nations that are stronger, physically. There's certain nations that are maybe smarter, different things like that. They each have their own unique traits, history, and abilities tied to those nations. Next on the list, we have the Iosans. Those are basically like the elves. And they have a very interesting background. They're isolationists, but their race is facing imminent doom. So there's a storyline in there, and I'm not going to pretend to be like a complete expert on this because I'm new to the Iron Kingdoms, but basically the summary of it all is their gods have died and been killed off, and so now their children are being born without souls, and you could actually play one of them. They're called a soulless, and so now you've got these long-lived peoples that are basically dying off, and so they're trying to figure out what to do. So I found that pretty interesting. The next is another variation of elves. They're the Nis, and they're cousins to the Iosans. They are masters of frost magic, but they were enslaved by the dragon Everblight. So they are very tied. They're tied into that, and that makes an interesting twist on what they can do and their history. You've got the Trollkin, which they're hulking tribal warriors that have incredible regeneration abilities and things. Really fun. You've got the Ogren, who are massive, loyal brutes who thrive in melee combat. They're like super, really strong, large, race. You've got the Gobbers and Bogren, which are kind of like goblins from D&D, and Gobbers are basically like skilled traders and laborers, and they're innovative alchemists and things like that. They can be thieves and whatnot. I mean, it's anything you want, but those for that version they're found in the cities and things like that, and they're not really discriminated against or whatnot. It's their cousins, the Bogren, who are wilder and more violent that cause issues. Then you also have the Rulic dwarves, who are inventors, engineers, and tinkerers that fit perfectly into this steampunk aesthetic. It's easy to see them working on warjacks and those steam-powered armors and things like that. It's really easy to put those two together. Some others to note that you can play. You can play undead. Now, it's not just generic undead. Like you could play like a revenant. You can play, there's like a whole bunch of variations of undead that you can actually play as a character from level one, which I found was pretty interesting. And that's mostly found in the Nightmare Isles book, but some pretty cool stuff there. You can be a gator man. Yes, you know, it's exactly what it sounds like. A big, gator like, you know, uh, person. It's pretty interesting, pretty cool. Um, you can be an Anura. For all you Chrono Trigger Frog Knight wannabes, yes, you could even play a frog race. I mean, they've got all kinds of stuff. It's a lot of fun. Which kind of brings us back. We've got a lot of unique races and things like that. Kind of talk about, I mean, this is Dungeons and Dragons, right? So let's talk about the dragons. Unlike traditional fantasy, dragons in the Iron Kingdoms are ancient, godlike entities with their own cult followings and world altering influence. Toruk, the Dragon Father, rules the Krix Islands through his Lich Lords. His children, whom he birthed from shards of his own crystal heart, are spread throughout the land, spreading blight wherever they are. Now, just to kind of give you an idea, these dragons emit such power that they actually kind of infect the lands around it with their power and corruption. So it's called the blight, and that blight could create thralls for them. You can be kind of infected with it, but actually kind of it'll modify you, right? So think of it like the Dragonborn a little bit from D&D, where you are a humanoid but with dragon ancestry. This one, it kind of like allows you to gain some of your dragon parents um, traits. You can gain breath weapons and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's pretty interesting. But just to kind of go on from there, like, so what happened was, at least as far as I understand it, when Toruk, who was kind of bored, he created his children. He thought that he would create the children so how he would have family and someone to talk to and enjoy ruling the kingdoms with. Um, However, it backfired because you know they had, since they were birthed from him, they had his same traits. So they all wanted that power and they all were seeking control, and they turned on him and ended up trying to kill him. So one of the things that was determined, because each of them had a piece of his crystal heart, was kind of like Highlander. If what a dragon kills another one and takes that piece of the crystal heart, it's going to make them stronger, right? So now you've got dragons spread across the land, spreading their influence, you know, creating nations, and and exerting power in this Highlander-esque competition against each other. So I thought that was kind of pretty cool. That it's kind of a pretty cool twist on dragons in this setting. Some races, like we talked about before, like the Nis, are directly tied to the dragon lore, affecting their culture and abilities and whatnot. Let's talk about some of the Iron Kingdom's unique classes. The first is the Warcaster. That's what we're going to talk about today. The Warcaster, basically, think of them as an armored uh, warrior, a magical warrior. You could think of it as a Gish. They can be built to fight in melee or at range, more with spells. But either way, these guys are magical warriors that can lead mechs into battle. Those mechs being the Warjacks. They can control Steamjacks, Warjacks, whatever. And that's kind of their thing. Also, they have gunfighters, gun mages. Think of it, I mean, it's kind of like self explanatory, right? But these are the skill and magic infused sharpshooters of the Iron Kingdoms. You can be an alchemist and a mechanic. Alchemist, pretty self explanatory for those, concocting different things. The mechanics, though, are like engineers. Think of those as the engineers who can create devastating weapons. They can uniquely use powered armor. They do have steam powered armor. So kind of like what I was talking about with the Warhammer thing, you can actually have that powered armor that you're wearing. There's not only mechs, but you could also wear that kind of stuff too, to augment yourself. So it's pretty cool stuff. Here's some of the other classes you can look forward to in the various source books for the Iron Kingdoms. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, and now for the moment y'all been waiting for, character creation. So this is meant to help you all out. For those of you who are experienced with character creation, it should be relatively easy. For those who are not, hopefully this helps you out. And we're going to talk about how to create a Warcaster. So as you remember, um, we were talking about a Warcaster is basically a gifted magical warrior who has the ability to speak and control warjacks telepathically. So that's a key because you can control warjacks. They call it a jack marshal. They're able to give verbal commands, but a warjack is can be controlled telepathically through their Warcaster, making it way more responsive. There's even an ability for the Warcaster to take direct control as if they were inside of it. Warcasters can cast intelligence-based magical spells from the Warcaster spell list, as well as any picked up from backgrounds or essence. Your magical abilities come from focus points rather than spell slots, though. So you can prepare spells much like a wizard does, but you have to spend focus points to cast. So think of it like this. You've got a bank of magical power, and then you can use that bank to cast the spells that you have prepared the night before, and you can reset those a little bit more frequently too. But either way, you let's say you have 4 focus points. You can cast 4 level 1 spells because it's 1 focus point per spell level, or you can do any combinations. You can cast a level 3 spell and then 1 level 1 spell and things like that. Now, the kind of cool thing about the focus point is that once you're outside of combat, um, you can restore these focus points and the spells that you already spent with 10 minutes of rest each. So, like for example, let's say you spent 2 focus points. If you take about 20 minutes to just relax and rest, you actually get those back. So you can kind of recharge. So you have a limited amount of magic that you can bring to bear in any combat situation, but you can recharge them, if as long as you can take a breather. So that's kind of neat. Also, the focus spells or the focus points that you get also give you certain abilities. Like you can get advantage on an attack roll. You can get extra damage on an attack that you've made or a spell that you've used. You can reduce damage that you take from a blow that hits you. And you could also get an advantage on saving throws. So it's pretty versatile, which is kind of neat. It's part of why I like the Warcaster. Now, you can also form a bond with a Steamjack, which is one of the biggest perks of being a Warcaster, right? So it allows you to allocate some of those focus points we talked about to those Warjacks that are under your control and allow them to use those abilities. So you can have, like 2 or 3 Warjacks that are under your control, each that has a focus point or so, or more that you've allocated, and then they can go and, let's say, make an attack with advantage, or they can reduce damage that they're taking in or get an advantage on a saving throw or something like that. So pretty awesome being able to use those abilities and extend your abilities to the mechs that are under your control, basically. Warcasters are also uniquely capable of commanding warjacks. So technically, a warcaster is the one that's going to control those because warjacks are the most powerful tech that nations can bring to the battlefield, and each nation protects them through specific language and code words. A warcaster who speaks the native language and obtains the codes can take control of a warjack where others would be unsuccessful. They even take that to another level. So not only do you have to know the language and know the code words, but you also have to telepathically crack a mental image code. So it's not just verbal. There is like a mental imagery that you need to know and be able to project to unlock the cortex and take control. So pretty interesting. Before we continue, we've kind of touched on it already, but what is a Steamjack? Think of it as a construct, kind of like in Dungeons and Dragons. You had different constructs, right? This is an autonomous mecha that has rudimentary cognition. It's able to follow simple commands and perform assigned tasks that would be too dangerous for humans and other races of the realm. Steamjacks fall into two categories. You've got labor jacks. Think of those as kind of like the civilian mechs that you can use. And you have warjacks, which are the ultra military grade version of jacks. While labor jacks primarily deal with labor intensive tasks, just as their name states, nothing prevents mercenary groups from modifying them for combat. Warjacks are the epitome of tech, though, and are some of the most potent military gear a nation can bring to bear. But, likewise, this doesn't prevent them from being used for tasks that labor jacks would normally handle if need be. Now, a Steamjack has three main components. The chassis is the metal skeleton and the system of pipes and gears that comprise the mech's body. The engine is what powers this behemoth. So these things do require quite a bit of fuel, and it is expensive to run them. Most warjacks are powered by steam through the use of coal and water. However, there are other races, such as the Iosan's Myrmidons and the Crix's Bonejacks, that have their own unique power systems. Finally, a jack has a cortex. Think of this as the main computer brain. The more complex the cortex, the more complicated the commands you can issue them successfully, the more focus points you can allocate to them to pull off those special maneuvers. Now, warjacks typically have the most expensive cortex, and laborjacks have the minimum required for what they're designed to do. Now, with a little bit of that background about a warcaster and what it is and what Steamjacks are, let's get into the actual character building. For our main first step, we're going to choose our essence, our race, and background. These are going to kind of build the core of what we're going to use for our character. Now, I'm using the essence system, which is unique to the Iron Kingdoms, right? So whereas normally, there's nothing saying you can't use the species traits, the racial traits that kind of typical normal D&D has, right? That's going to give you +2 to a stat and a +1 to another stat. You can use that here, but I'm using their unique system here, which is you choose an essence. That essence will give you +2 to a stat. It'll give you kind of a unique trait, and it'll also unlock a series of feats associated with that. So think of the essence as something that your character excels at. If you use essence, obviously you're not going to combine that with the racial stat increases, but that doesn't prevent you from taking the traits that each race has unique to them. So I think the essence system allows you to a little bit more flexibility, so you don't have to just be kind of typecasted into one thing. For the different essences, you have intellectual, mighty, agile, gifted, pious, and blighted. I chose to use the essence of gifted. This means that you are gifted with magic, right? So it's going to make sense, for my warcaster to have that gift along, as a casting type of class. Um, and actually, kind of a unique thing for this setting is that humans do not have access to magic without being gifted technically, right? So technically, if you're trying to keep in line with the lore, if you're a human and you want to be a caster, you're supposed to take the gifted essence. But for us, I chose it because it makes sense. It's going to give you +2 to your spell casting ability, whether that's intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. You do get a bonus cantrip, which we can choose. So I'm going to choose Mage Hand for that, and access to some interesting feats. For our race, now, as I said, it could be that you're using it to impact your starting stats if you try to go with a little bit more of the traditional 5th edition style. But regardless, the race is going to also impact your potential abilities. So for flavor, I chose the Iosan elf, basically, due to their tragic and unique backstory. We'll ignore the ability score increase because I'm using essence. But if you went with the racial ability scores rather than the essence, Iosans get +2 to intelligence and +1 to charisma. They're medium size with a walk speed of 30. They have dark vision, allowing you to see clearly without color in up to 60 feet. Iosans get proficiency in perception right off the bat, which is one of the most useful skills in the game. Also, they have a trait called Martial Society, which when you make an attack roll and you botch the roll, you roll a 1, you can re-roll it, but you got to keep the next roll. So that's pretty handy to keep yourself from screwing up an important attack roll. Skill versatility is another cool boon for this, which allows you to have proficiency with any combination of 2 other skills or tools of your choice. Languages, they can speak, read, and write Shire and 1 other language of your choice. So not too bad. They offer a lot of flexibility. Next, we look at the backgrounds. Backgrounds grant bonuses to skills, stats, and roleplay flavor. Now, what I look for primarily is something that fits with the character backstory, and then secondarily, I am looking for what kinds of backgrounds will allow me to get a proficiency, ability score, or trait, maybe even a spell that I might need. Bear in mind that if you get a proficiency in a skill or tool from 2 different sources, you can basically replace that with a different proficiency of the same kind of skill or tool. Using an Iosan gives you 3 skill proficiencies. Combine that with the proficiency you get from your class and your background, you have the potential for 7. So have fun with that. Be creative. Now, one thing that I did look at where all of the backgrounds from the Iron Kingdoms were concerned were backgrounds that granted you more spell options that would further increase your intelligence stat and make you more magically powerful as a warcaster. So for those of you who are interested in being more magically focused, this is for you. Okay, so there are 3 backgrounds in the core book. You've got the Order of Wizardry, you have the Grey Lords, and the Magus at Arms. And then you have the Street Necromancer, which is from the Nightmare Isles book. I compared their bonus spells to the spell list granted by the Warcaster. And as we just talked about, for flexibility, the Grey Lords grant the player the most freedom of spell selection. So basically what I'm saying is the Grey Lord's background has the most overlap in bonus spells with the spell list that the Warcasters have. So they have the most that are in common. This background gives you the ability then to pick 5 out of their 6 additional spells because of that fact. The Magus at Arms and the Order of Wizardry, they have 2 that overlap, and the Street Necromancer has 1 that overlaps. So as you can see, for if you're somebody that says, hey, I want to pick my own spells and make, and you could basically pick it from anything that is accessible that makes sense off of that list. go for it. Go for the Grey Lords. They're going to give you the most opportunity to do that. But I'm not going to knock any of the other backgrounds for this purpose either, because they all have their own unique spells that are pretty cool and could fit what you want for your background. Now, it's all personal preference in the end, and I'm not going to go this route. I'm going to kind of build more of a balanced character versus one that's focused on this, but this is another viable direction. I just kind of wanted to present that to you. And if you do this, you'll be able to start with an 18 intelligence stat, which is a huge advantage. So anybody who's really trying to optimize their build, making more of a min-maxi build, I would suggest you look into getting one of those backgrounds. Now, like I said, what I'm doing is I'm going to go with a background essence combination that also supports the martial ability. And that can be the choice of either a strength-based martial ability or dexterity-based. For today's build, I'm going to focus on dexterity. Now, the book recommends that the mercenary background is one to choose from the core. And that one is pretty cool too. I won't knock it. So if you're struggling as far as what you want to do, take a look at it. The mercenary background from core gives you proficiency also with steam powered armor, in addition to your proficiency with Warcaster armor. For flavor, I'm going with the Stormfall Archer from the Borderlands and Beyond book. Stormfall Archers allow you to choose a bonus to strength or dexterity. You gain proficiency martial ranged weapons and short swords. The skill proficiencies you gain are athletics and survival. One language of your choice, so there you go. For equipment, you gain an Iosan short sword, a pendant featuring the Retribution of Syrah, traveler's clothes, and 10 gold pieces. Now, they do get 2 features in the Stormfall Archer background that are pretty unique. One is bombardment. So if you use any kind of a bow, and the bows in this world, you can attach explosives to it and all kinds of crazy stuff. But anyway, you can double the normal range of any bow that you use. So that's pretty cool. And then you also get a very interesting ability, which is called the Skirmisher's ability, which after you make a ranged attack, which includes a ranged magical attack, you can use your reaction to move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. So that can be pretty interesting. Now, as far as traits, bonds, flaws that are unique to the Stormfall Archer, these are the ones that I chose, but you can use whatever you want. This is completely flavor. This is however you want to make your character. So let's talk of assigning ability scores. Warcasters benefit from intelligence, strength or dexterity, and constitution. Intelligence is going to power all your magical abilities. It's going to be, how potent your magic is, how far you can control your warjacks, like what your sphere of influence is. And then you want to have some kind of a combat ability, right? So you want some strength, some dexterity, either one of those, and then constitution, because you'd only have a D8 of hit points, so anything that's going to keep you in the fight longer is a good thing. So you kind of have to balance your magic and your combat skills. I'm using the standard array, so we have a 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. And for me, this is what I chose. I put the 13 in your strength. I put dexterity as 15, and then we get a +1 from the background, so that'll be a 16. Constitution as 12. This will give us a +1 per level for con. Intelligence as 14, which will also get a +2 from gifted, so that makes it a 16. And wisdom 10 with a charisma of 8. So charisma is going to basically be the dump stat for this class, but it doesn't have to be. It could be whatever you want. So once again, for my scores, I got a strength of 13, dexterity of 16, a constitution of 12, an intelligence of 16, a wisdom of 10, and a charisma of 8. Warcaster spells and abilities. Let's talk about the class and go through the basics. Warcaster grants you proficiencies in light armor and Warcaster armor. So think of Warcaster armor as kind of cool. It's like think of it as the mecha driver's pilot suit that they wear. It's specialized, but it's decent armor and it's actually powered, and there's a whole slew of things you can do with that on its own. You get proficiency with simple melee weapons, simple firearms, battle axes, and great swords. So add to that list the short sword that we got from the background and the martial ranged weapons from our background, and you got a pretty decent selection there. You get saving throw proficiencies, which are Constitution and Intelligence. So two pretty solid ones there. Skills, you get to choose from the list of Arcana, Athletics, Perception, and Survival. You could choose two from there. And since we have the athletics and survival from our background and they overlap with these, we could choose two from any of those skills or tools or proficiencies that we want. So um, this is where we're trying to maximize that benefit of the overlap, and we talked about that. So we're going to end up with 7 skill proficiencies, and these are the ones that I have. Hit points, we've got D8. So your first level, you're going to have 8 plus 1, or 9 total hit points. And our initiative is going to be plus 3. For the first starting weapon, I choose, you can have basically a mechanical pistol or a mechanical, I think it was a simple melee weapon, right? So I went with the pistol, and a mechanical pistol is going to give 1d10 piercing, and it has a range of 40/120. It's a light weapon, and it has a magazine of 1. That means you can shoot it, but then you have to reload it. And then that's going to come with 15 rounds of ammo, and we'll do that instead of the simple melee weapon. Since we already get a short sword, right, from our Iosan background, it wouldn't, I mean, I guess it could make sense if you're going melee, but we're more ranged. So I also will choose an Iosan pistol, right, because you are allowed to get any simple weapon of choice, and that is a simple weapon. It is a pistol that does 1d8 piercing damage, and it has a range of 80/240, light with a magazine of 1, a soldier's pack, and light Warcaster armor. Now that's huge because Warcaster armor actually is pretty expensive, so the fact that you start out with that is pretty decent. The Warcaster class gives you focus points to fuel magic, empower warjacks, or enhance themselves, which is cool, right? So now let's talk about it. At level 1, which is what we're working on, we get from the gifted essence an extra cantrip of Mage Hand. But what are we going to do as far as the Warcaster magic? We get to select 2 more cantrips from the Warcaster spell list. Now, I chose Arcane Bolt, which casts a 1d10 force damage attack 60 feet. I kind of think of that kind of like standard D&D with the Warlocks, right? It's kind of a similar attack to theirs. And I also picked up Sense Cortex, right? This is kind of like a detect magic thing, but it's a cantrip, so you can use it repeatedly, and it allows you to detect the presence and grade of a warjack's cortex within your control range. That's important as a warcaster because you can take control of those cortexes, and so detecting them, you can either figure out where there might be potential enemies and or potential mechs that you can bring under your control. So pretty handy. Warcasters can prepare spells much as wizards do in 5th edition. At level 1, you can choose to prepare spells such as Burning Hands, Conceal Cortex, Detect Magic, Fog Cloud, Jump, Jumpstart, Razor Wind, Shield, and Thunderwave. You prepare these spells basically using your intelligence modifier plus your Warcaster level of spells, and it can't be any higher than the spell level that you can cast. So if we have an intelligence modifier of 3, which is what we have, and we are level 1 for our Warcaster level, that's 4 level 1 spells. Your spell DC is 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier. So for our purposes, that's going to be 8 plus 2 plus 3 for a DC of 13. Your spell attack modifier equals your proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier. So that's going to be plus 5. Now, another thing that Warcasters have is a control range. This is how far your arcane abilities can reach to control your Warjacks. So for us, that's determined by your maximum focus points times 10 feet. At level 1, that's 2 times 10, or 20 feet. We can use a bonded mechanical weapon, just like we were talking about earlier with the mechanical pistol, right, as a spellcasting focus for Warcaster spells. You can also bond with any weapon or armor by spending an action rather than a short rest. Now the next step is choosing the Warcaster Tradition. So there's quite a few choices for Warcaster Traditions if you use all of the source material, but we're going to touch on the core options where you have the ability to be a controller, arcanist, and a soldier. If we made this Warcaster more magic focused with essence and background choice, arcanist would definitely be a solid choice. That's going to boost your abilities, to use those focus points. I think it increases your focus pool and things like that. So you're going to be more magically focused. So that's cool. You also can pick soldier, which helps with your martial prowess, right? So it allows you to bound more significantly with your weapons and such, and be more of, like I said, like it says, a soldier. So you're better with either your melee weapons or your ranged weapons in support of your also very cool ability to control mechs, or Steamjacks, but that's what they are. They're mechs, basically. Today, though, what we're going to do is we're going to use our balanced Iosan Warcaster as a controller, because this one focuses on controlling Warjacks in battle and allows you to use your abilities to better control them, control more of them, and kind of that's your focus. It also gives you a starting Steamjack. It's called a clapped out Steamjack, which is basically a Steamjack that you've put together from scrap parts. So you don't have to worry about not having a Steamjack. You get to have one right out the gate, which is kind of cool. Now, controller gives us the tool proficiency of the mechanics toolkit, which is essential to modifying or repairing your Warjacks. The other traditions don't, so that's a huge boon. Controllers get the bond ability, which allows you at level 1 to bond with Steamjacks. So you can replace your bond with a mechanical weapon or armor with a Steamjack bond, which is pretty cool. And at each level gained, you can choose a new jack to bond with. So with the basics of our character together, you kind of see all the little pieces fitting together. We've got an Iosan elf, ranged focus, still has decent magic, has good ranged abilities, can control mechs, is a controller, so that's the focus, is being in battle, standing side by side with their Steamjacks. Now, what about our first one? As a controller, you start out with a broken down Steamjack made of salvaged components. It does not come with any kind of weapons or equipment, and it has a ferrum grade cortex. That means there's like 4 levels of cortex. It's the second from the bottom, so it's not the worst and it's not the best. You can read up on each of these levels of cortex in the books. Ferrum, though, is able to accept commands with a drive DC of 15 for the more complex things that maybe like a Jack Marshall would issue. For a Warcaster, it's easier because you can telepathically just direct them to do it. Now here are the stats for our basic Steamjack Jalopy. Initially, it is more useful as a pack mule until you can attach some better armor and or shield on it and give it a weapon or two. Now, this is where I will touch on languages. Our Warcaster understands Shire and 2 other languages. I would choose 2 of the most applicable languages for the jacks you might encounter. Every nation has their own Steamjacks or Warjacks, and some of them are very unique. Rule folk, or the dwarves, are more efficient, but tend to be slower than the human-created Warjacks. Iosians don't use water and coal, but magic, and so they just have to recharge over time. Crick's warjacks use necrotite, which is basically crystals that are derived from the battlefield, basically the killing of living creatures. So definitely an evil thing, but unique to their warjacks. So language is very important because as we touched on earlier, you have to know the language of the warjack's origin. And if you're talking humans, they're separated by nationality, not just the race. So you have that to consider as well. So just to foot stomp this and make sure we're clear, Steamjacks do have security, and it's either at the Laborjack level or the Warjack level and tied to the nation of origin. Laborjacks need to be verbally commanded using the native language code phrase, but one of the perks of being a Warcaster is a Warcaster can bypass through this through mental commands. However, the Warcaster has to be able to understand that language to be able to do that. Now, Warjacks, as military-grade weaponry, are extremely secure. They contain cortex locks, which require complex mental code in order to access the cortex. This requires specific instructions to mentally project the correct unlock codes, and they are all based on the nation of origin. So choose your languages wisely. Ultimately, you can wipe a cortex, but that's going to require some time and resources, and you may want to be able to commandeer a jack you come across or win over in battle by defeating its jack marshal or warcaster. So here is the final build of our Iosan warcaster. Is he going to be able to solve the tragedy of his dying race? Or will he meet vengeance on the rest of the Iron Kingdoms for their part in the Iosan fate? He's built to be balanced, not focusing on one thing, but being good at spells, ranged attacks, and issuing commands to jacks on the battlefield. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of character building for the Iron Kingdoms. I want to send a special thanks to the creators of the Iron Kingdoms and encourage you to visit Steamforge Games to check out their Iron Kingdoms RPG content, as well as the wargaming version of this fun campaign setting. So go ahead and comment below with your Warcaster builds and thoughts on the Iron Kingdom itself. Remember, if you enjoy content like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, and follow us on X. See you in the next adventure, and may you always roll 20s.